let's go over to the most important part today, the presentations. And please also write down the questions that you might have. We are doing the 3 presentations in a row now, and then there's time for Q&A at the end. So keep the questions you might have in mind, and we'll bring them up later. So first we have Johan Linåker. He works as a senior researcher at RISE, Research Institute of Sweden. And he will present how cities and municipalities can share and collaborate on developing and maintaining open source software-based systems for their common use. And he will provide some different examples from across Europe on how this is being done. So without further ado, please welcome Johan Linåker.
Thank you. Okay, so a lot of good acronyms in the beginning. So I'm going to talk about open source basically, and how that as a construct, as an instrument, as a lever can be used by cities, by local governments, by municipalities, basically to solve common problems. We have this common physical infrastructure, but if we enter the digital world, we also have the digital infrastructure, which is everywhere. I mean, just as you look at this building, you have these different building blocks and so on. If you enter the digital world, we also have these building blocks everywhere, even though you can't see them always. And the thing I'm going to talk about is how are these building blocks made? Because typically, especially on the municipal level, on the city level, in Sweden we have 290 municipalities. And if you look at other European countries, smaller or same size, you can have 4,000 or 5,000 municipalities, cities, local governments. Again, they all have the same need for an infrastructure. And by collaborating on this development, you can actually have a lever for innovation, but also in terms of actually seeing, okay, but how is it actually constructed, getting an agency or a power over which building blocks you want to procure, because your needs and your taste will change with time, but also from a security perspective, being able to see how is this built up, and then collaborating on the sustainability and the design of it. So that I think that's the transition here. So this is basically about the collaborative coding of common solutions, addressing common needs, building a common infrastructure, instead of, as the typical scenario is, that all municipalities are locked into basically 3 to 4 different vendors across the different verticals. Again, everyone has the same needs, but everyone is locked in. And I don't know how many times I've heard this sentence about, yeah, we're locked in this system that's still from, it's gotten from the 90s. The design and functionality is somewhere else than what you would expect of today. Yeah, and briefly, I've been researching how companies, how public sector more recently can collaborate and share on this topic, both on software, but also more recently on data. And the standardized interfaces and how you collect the data, how you share knowledge and so on. Basically, again, enabling this lever of innovation, gaining transparency into how things are built, but also gaining the sovereignty and the agency, being able to choose the building blocks and design them based on your needs and switch easily. So, what is open source software? One very condensed sentence is that it can be described as liberally licensed, collaboratively developed software. So 2 parts here. But before going into that, just to give you a sense, as I said, you have these building blocks, but enter the digital world, and open source is everywhere. And basically, open source is, yeah, the building block is liberally licensed. You can take it and use however you want. You can reuse it, and to different extents then collaboratively developed, so that you can actually collaborate, introduce your own needs, and find this common level of commodity. And you can find it in verticals across energy, automotive, telecom, basically everywhere in the industry, but also almost slowly in the public sector now as well. There is a big need, but we are looking from the public sector perspective, we are in the very forefront of going there, even though there has been adoption on and off for the past 20 years. But we have a lot to learn from the private sector. So the main idea here is that open source is everywhere. The whole foundation that we have, looking into your mobile phones, your refrigerators, the Mars rover, your cars, the energy system, everything is based on open source. And it's quite fragile because not all open source is sustainably maintained. It's typically commonly created by individuals or companies. And these individuals, they may burn out, switch context, companies may pivot, go bankrupt, and then we are left with these very small building blocks that's reused everywhere. So it's a very fragile system. So there is a lot of potential, but there's also a lot of risks that needs to be addressed, both from the public and private perspective. So looking at the first part, the liberal license part. So basically, this is open source software is software with an open source license attached to it that basically says, here, take the software, use it however you want, lift the hood, look how it's constructed, change it, add functionality to your use case, and also share alike, share it with others. And then there are different varieties on this that maybe you want or need to share your additions to it, but I won't dive into that. And what this license model does is basically enabling the collaborative development or collaborative coding, enabling that the software is collaboratively developed by the stakeholders, by the citizens, by the public sector, by industry, everyone coming together. All of these are members of the community surrounding a specific open source software component. Typically both users and developers addressing a common need while they are all coming under this umbrella of the community for a common reason and a common vision. And the development process is typically very open, meaning that whoever can contribute to this piece of software, addressing your own needs, ideally, the steering and governance is typically based on meritocracy, meaning that you gain influence by showing merit, by contributing, by doing footwork and so on, and you choose yourself what you want to focus on, your own needs, ideally. And then compared to the more traditional development, this is often carried out in silos, much as I would say municipalities today work. They talk to the vendor instead of talking to their neighbor on how they can solve it. And influence is based on a hierarchical status, and you're appointed the task that you are to work with by someone else. This has some implications. You can't come to a community of an open source software and expect professional support. You can't expect to get your needs implemented, and you can't just go in there and start ordering around. There's no contractual agreement. If you want something, do it yourself or pay someone to do it, or enter this collaborative process, gain influence, and negotiate and gain agency with time. So why? Well, looking at the individual level, it's just like joining the local chess or football club. You get a sense of belonging, recognition for your contributions. Looking at the organizational level, both public and private, civil society is the potential for lowering the cost by developing the piece of software and the tools, infrastructure that you all need across the different verticals. It has the potential to lower the cost, but also has the potential of enabling open innovation. Everyone can contribute with their own use cases, their own knowledge, expertise, competencies, and so on. It's also a way of improving branding and PR, as a lot of developers today wants to work with open source. But especially, and I think very importantly here, is that it enables a level of interoperability. By having this transparency in the code and how it's used and can be used and how it's developed, you can enable different systems to interact, enabling municipalities to interconnect to the different levels of the digital infrastructure to merge together. Basically, the what you call it, the thing we have between the bricks, basically the glue or whatever in enabling these constructions. And also this concept of sovereignty that is getting quite high on the agenda now, hence also open source, that you should be able to choose the technology, make the decision based on your own needs, your own laws and your own values, not implied by a vendor somewhere else in the world or locally. Basically, it's about vendor lock-in. But given the regionalization and the global climate and where we are going, there are risks in being dependent on certain vendors, on certain other places globally, as political change, policy making can provide risks. And we also have this, that we talked about transparency again, but we can also talk about the competition and potential economic growth. By enabling the openness, you're also enabling the small, medium-sized companies, the entrepreneurs, to come in and compete with the large actors, the incumbents. And it also enables this competition and entrepreneurial growth that has been shown in several studies. But why is not something happening? I mean, open source as a concept, as the definition has been around since '98. The concept of sharing, collaborating on software since the '50s. Nothing new here. If you look at the public sector, and especially municipalities, a very common thing here is that they outsource everything. They are reliant on external competencies, consultants. They have lost this internal dynamic absorptive capability to really develop and adopt and consider open source as a lever here. And this stretches across the digital transformation field, I would say, to a large extent. And there's a lot of uncertainties in how to consider open source in terms of the procurement processes and frameworks, finding out what open source solutions there are out there. Typically, as I said, municipalities, public sector, they are locked in several levels in terms of platforms, file formats, vendors, and so on. And a typical scenario is that they glance on the neighboring municipalities, see how they did the procurement, then hence they go to the vendor X as most others. There's uncertainties. This is something new. We don't have the internal competence here. We don't know what open source is. Sounds scary. Why not just go with vendor X that provides the software that we've always used, that provides the software that provides support for docx format or whatever. And then there's this cultural aspect here that is present anytime you enter the word openness. If it's in the companies everywhere, it's this human, physical, mental risk or risk aversiveness of sharing knowledge, exposing yourself, exposing your secrets. It's deeply, deeply human, and I come across it daily, no matter what organization. Then you are different levels of maturity in managing this. So there's a lot of risk averseness in municipalities. You just want your elderly care, the schools, they should just run. You don't want to change anything, just like banks and nuclear power plants. You just want things to work, so you back away. You don't, status quo, and that's what large vendors like. They don't want anything to change. And there's also a lack here of if the people working at the municipalities have limited knowledge, the knowledge on the level of policymaking is even less, with some very, very unique exceptions. And there's no coordination in terms of maintenance and a collaboration. Everyone is fumbling in the dark. There's very few examples of how they come together. But there are some lights here. So I've been looking at different examples. So I don't want to bring you all down. So I'm trying to lift you up to provide you with some examples. So the first example here is in Sweden, which is not that good of an example really, but it's a good place to learn from. So it's the OpenE platform. It's an e-service platform developed from an EU project, currently in use by 180 plus municipalities. But basically it's locked into one single vendor. Even though the source code is there openly, documentation and know-how, tools closed to the vendor. Good for the vendor, not as good for the municipalities. So it's about, even though there is the potential, you need the knowledge to know how to leverage open source as an instrument to really gain the benefits that you want to gain out of it. A better example I would like to call it is the OS2 collaboration in Denmark, an association based of 80 plus cities, municipalities, some regions as well. Here, number of typically a smaller set of municipalities come together with a common need, problem. They sit together, they collaborate on their needs, they go to the vendors, they procure the development, they collaborate on everything all the way through. Today they have about 25 to 30 different products, and they go up and down, but still, they found this way of replicating this process. They have governance processes in place so they can easily spin up. When someone has an idea, they come together. Another example is from the Czech Republic, where you have the civil society actually stepping in with the Open Cities Foundation. So they bring together about 20 different cities and also some regions. They bring in projects from the different cities. Typically, Prague is one of the main lead users here, the capital. So they host and help and enable this collaboration, providing this neutral area, pooling the resources, the know-how, enabling this common knowledge platform for everyone to collaborate and gain the agency over their development and their needs. And also another example is if we go to the city of Paris. So they've been actively working with open source at least since 2001, when they started developing this e-service platform openly. So they had local policymakers coming and, hey, we have this e-service platform, why not make it open source? And since then, since the beginning of the 2000s, they've been developing this Lutece platform, which today has about 400 different plugins. The main thing here is that they have a lot of resources, but due to shifting focus, it's been more on the development, less on the community. So it hasn't really gotten that strong of the adoption. But now, since 2018-19, they've been getting more competence, and especially one individual really driving this, really enabling and taking the collaborative aspect into this thing and really disseminating and building the community and ecosystem, both nationally and internationally. And looking at, for example, in the Netherlands, you can see this pattern. So if you look at Paris on one end, where you have a strong player developing something, and then so this is what we have with the case of Signalen. So this is a tool similar to Fix My Street, Fix Min Gata, a tool for reporting issues in the public space. So it started out at the city of Amsterdam. Again, you can see a common thread here with the strong actors doing the leading the way. So the city of Amsterdam started developing this, and then more and more cities joined. But then it's about gaining this sustainable development and maintenance and enabling this collaboration, enabling the cities to come together and collaborate. So now they have started to bring this into the Dutch Association of Municipalities, in a similar model way, looking at how Denmark is doing it in OS2, trying to find the setup, the processes, the governance. How can we replicate this? So I would say Signalen is really a first proof of concept, finding the way how to do this. So what we really need here is there is a need for growing common institutional capabilities and capacities here. You have these different municipalities all over. They're all fumbling. They have different levels of resources. But what's really needed is that they need to come together. And especially if you look at in Denmark, it's typically the three major cities leading the development: Aarhus, Aalborg, Odense, or for Copenhagen. And in the Netherlands, you have Amsterdam being one of the main leaders, and you have Paris in the case of Lutece, and Prague as a lead user in the case of the Czech Republic. So you really have the more capable ones. They have the resources, not always the support, but there is some shining stars within the organizations that are really driving this. So we have this concept of eldsjäl, maybe advocate is a good word in English, really driving this change and really understanding that we need to bridge these barriers, stop working in these artificial silos and coming together and forming this more common community. And I'm not talking just about the public sector. You need also to look at academia with open science and the civil society. As we've seen across all the cases, civil society and the citizens have a great impact here and are really key for enabling this transformation and driving the input to this transformation. Public sector can't do it alone. And this is a key thing we can note in all of the three cases. But also industry, they need, even though they are on the forefront, they can benefit from public sector maturing, and they can learn from each other. So they really need to step up here. And I'm not talking about just the local, I'm talking about the international level, the national and the local. They all come together. We have the municipal, local government, city level, but you also have the regional, the national, the European, the international, just as how standards work in pyramids. Also the digital infrastructure. Everything is connected. This is something we need to understand. Hey!